Hi guys, the Health Secretary Steve Barclay appeared on the Sophy Ridge show, where he was challenged on Brexit. And while there was an article in the Times newspaper this weekend that suggested that there is growing support within his government to attempt to fix Brexit in some way, perhaps trying to negotiate a Swiss-style deal, Steve obviously didn't get the memo. Here Barclay failed to admit that Brexit was even causing problems, asking the journalist instead to focus on the positives. And by the way, he didn't actually give any examples of positives. Have a listen to this.
He said that Brexit will result in the UK's trade intensity being 15% lower in the long run than if the UK had remained in the EU. The latest evidence suggests that Brexit has had a significant adverse impact on UK trade. And going on to say, via reducing both overall trade volumes and the number of trading relationships between UK and EU firms. Do you accept that Brexit has had, as the OBR says, a significant adverse impact on UK trade?
Well, I think there's dangers in looking at one little bit of the ledger in isolation.
One little bit of the ledger? This is the OBR. This is the OBR talking about where the UK does most of its trade, the EU. This isn't one little bit of the ledger. This is him attempting to gaslight the public.
If you look at the vaccines rollout, whilst technically, legally, an EU member could have done things differently, I think culturally would not have done so. Well,
the question is, do you accept Brexit?
Finally, we have some truth. So we, as an EU member, we could have done things differently. But he's sort of suggesting that culturally, the UK would have gone it alone. So he's finally admitting that it was not actually necessary to be outside the EU to roll out the vaccine. Now, unfortunately, later in this interview, he contradicts himself.
It's had a significant adverse impact on UK trade.
Well, I think there's pros and cons, and the point is we have opportunities.
So that would be a big con, wouldn't it?
We have opportunities through the divergence opportunities I've just talked about, things like Solvency II, to get those pension funds investing in levelling up communities, better reflecting the needs of our financial services market.
On trade, specifically, do you accept Brexit has had a significant adverse impact on UK trade?
Well, what I'm saying is you've got to look at the issues in terms of Brexit in the round. There are
in the round. She's asking you about the negative impacts it's having on trade. And his response is, yeah, but look at it in more general. What about the vaccine? What about this? What about that?
Areas where there have been difficulties in terms of greater friction, and we're looking to work constructively with EU partners on that. But equally, there are very significant opportunities as a result of Brexit. I don't think we would have done the vaccine rollout in the way that we did had we remained a member of the EU.
It sounds like...
Okay, but before you said it wasn't necessary to be outside the EU to roll out the vaccine. And there's ample evidence for that. I've used the video clip a number of times from the BBC, whereas the head of the UK regulatory body for health, who said it was not necessary to be outside the EU to roll out the vaccine. And we have other countries, for example, Hungary, which is a member of the EU, and they rolled out the vaccine at around the same time as the UK.
And the significant regulatory opportunities we have, and the autumn statement signalled our determination to take those.
You're clear on...
What? Give us some examples. Point to something that we can say, this is a clear benefit of leaving the EU. Like you had a minister, Jacob Rees-Mogg, I don't know how long he was employed for, 6 months, whatever it was, and his job, he had one job to do. That was to find Brexit opportunities. And he came up with nothing. Came up with straw men. He came up with vague ideas about how it would benefit the UK. But in reality, he came up with nothing.
On what you see to be the kind of positives and the opportunities, but do you accept it has had a significant adverse impact on trade?
What I'm saying is there's pros and cons. It's very hard to model.
It's a very specific
It's very
question.
hard to model exactly what the impact would be. For example,
The OBR modelled it. The OBR said it's going to impact GDP by 4%. Like, how can you turn around and say, well, it's difficult to understand the real impact of Brexit? That's the job of the OBR, and they have come back and said it's going to have a negative impact on GDP by 4%.
Just been through
well, the
pandemic.
OBR's done that, haven't they?
Well, of course, but I know from my time when I was Brexit Secretary just how difficult it is to model these things. Of course, we've been through a pandemic.
So it's easy to say, well, look, Brexit has many positives. It's easy to say that. But when it comes to negatives, well, we can't be really sure. So you can be sure about the positives, even though you can't give any examples. But when it comes to the negatives, well, nobody can really know.
That has had an impact. There's a range of things. But the point is, what matters is we maximise the freedoms that we have, take those particularly into the high growth sectors, such as in digital, life sciences, green technologies and financial services. And the autumn statements...
What freedoms? Once again, he keeps talking about these freedoms. The freedom to do what? Tell us something that you couldn't do before that you can do now. There must be something. You talk about new technologies, you talk about AI, you talk about life sciences, you talk about research and development. Give us some examples of something you couldn't do before that you can do now. Obviously, he has nothing. It works the other way. Things you used to be able to do before, but you can't do now, but he won't talk about those because there isn't modelling for it or something. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.